This is a story I've never shared with anyone outside of those who were directly involved, and it's one that's hard for me to tell. It didn't happen to me, but to my mother, and it still haunts me to this day. To give you some context about my mom, which will make sense later, let me start with a bit of her backstory. Before she met my dad, she was working toward becoming a police officer. She wasn't in the academy yet, but she was soaking up everything she could at her university and through classes offered by the local police department. Ultimately, she didn't pursue that career because my dad was already a cop, and she didn't want both of them in such demanding roles. They worried they'd rarely see each other or have time to raise their future kids, me and my two older brothers, Rob and Lance. Here's what happened. When I was a sophomore in high school, my mom went on a weekend getaway with my aunt and uncle to a beach city. It was a well-deserved break for her. She's always been such a hard-working woman. On the last night of their trip, the three of them went to a restaurant for dinner and drinks. The place had a bar, and their system was that when a customer ordered a drink from their table, the server would relay the order to the bartender. The bartender would then prepare the drink and leave it at the end of the bar for the server to pick up and deliver. My mom ordered her drink, and the server passed the request to the bartender. Once the bartender finished making her cocktail, he placed it at the end of the bar as usual. This is where it gets hard for me to keep my composure. Apparently, some guy had been watching my mom throughout their time at the restaurant and overheard what she ordered. Neither my mom, my aunt, nor my uncle noticed him staring or eavesdropping, but this sick bastard saw his chance. While her drink sat at the bar waiting for the server, he slipped a date rape drug into it. No one saw him do it. The server then picked up the drink and brought it to my mom. She sipped on it during dinner, and as time passed, she started feeling dizzy and nauseous. She knew something was wrong right away. She hadn't had nearly enough to be drunk. Trusting her instincts, she excused herself from the table to head to the restroom. The restrooms were at the back of the restaurant, right next to a back door that led to an alley with trash bins, employee parking, and security cameras. The man followed her. Just before she could enter the women's restroom, he shoved her through the back door into the dimly lit alley. She stumbled onto the concrete, and he pounced on her like a predator. My mom tried to make out his face, but between the effects of the drug and the darkness, she couldn't. The only thing she could recall later was his size. He was a big man. He was trying to assault her, attempting to tear off her pants, shirt, and undergarments. She fought back with everything she had, but he was hitting her and cutting her with some kind of blade he was carrying. While he attacked her, he whispered in her ear about how beautiful she was and how he couldn't let her go without getting a taste. What a twisted piece of shit. Thankfully, my mom's police training from years ago kicked in. Somehow, despite the drugs clouding her mind and body, she managed to break free. She stumbled toward the trash bins and started making as much noise as she could, banging on them to draw attention. The drug made it impossible for her to scream or run back to the restaurant. By some miracle, one of the employees heard the commotion and rushed out. He jumped on the attacker, pinning him down, and had other staff call 911. The kid stayed on top of the guy until the police arrived and cuffed him. To that employee who saved my mom's life, thank you. We owe you a debt we can never repay, and we'll always be grateful. My mom collapsed as soon as help arrived and doesn't remember much after that. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in a hospital room with police officers by her bedside. They asked her to recount everything she could remember, and she told them what happened. When she asked what happened after the employee intervened, the police filled her in. The kid had held the attacker down until they got there, and the paramedics rushed her to the hospital. She'd suffered a broken eye socket, a broken nose, and 3 deep cuts to her chin, scalp, and stomach, all requiring multiple stitches and staples. While my mom was in the hospital, my aunt called us to tell us what had happened. Without a second thought, my brothers and I rushed to be with her. Seeing her in that hospital bed, bruised and bandaged, is an image I'll never forget. The bastard who did this had no idea who he was messing with. During questioning, the police made it clear to him that my mom was not someone to underestimate. She's the daughter of a high-ranking police officer, the niece of a U.S. federal marshal, the wife of a lieutenant, and the cousin of 3 lawyers. He pleaded guilty to all 3 charges against him and was sentenced to 25 years to life. This story comes from my freshman year at the University of Hawaii, when I was trying hard to break out of my shell and become my own person. Growing up, I had a very controlling mother who always blamed others when things went wrong, which made me naturally reserved. I've been dealing with creepy guys hitting on me since I was 12 because I was tall for my age and developed early. Over time, I learned to be cautious and avoid putting myself in risky situations. But I was also naive. I hesitated to tell people about uncomfortable encounters because I didn't want to inconvenience them, and I was taught not to call the police unless it was an absolute emergency. Unfortunately, I carried this mindset into college, which I regret, especially because of moments like this one. One day, I was on the bus heading home from school when I noticed an older white man, probably in his mid-40s to early 50s, staring at me. He was athletic, about 6 feet tall, wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, khaki shorts, and a polo shirt. At first, I brushed it off as nothing unusual. He looked like a typical tourist. It wasn't uncommon for older men to stare at me, either because they found my mixed Japanese and white heritage exotic, or because they were eyeing my figure. I usually wore t-shirts and jeans, so I wasn't drawing attention on purpose, but the look still happened. He got off the bus well before my stop, so I figured that was the end of it and didn't give it another thought. 2 weeks later, though, I was on my way home again, and the same man boarded the bus from a nearby mall. It was a cloudy day, but there he was, wearing the same baseball cap and sunglasses. That struck me as odd. What was he trying to hide? This time, he didn't just glance at me. He stared relentlessly for about 20 minutes, leaning forward in his seat. From past experiences, I knew most people wouldn't step in to help unless someone was physically attacking you or loudly harassing you. So, as expected, no one on the bus paid him any mind. I started to feel uneasy. When I reached my stop, I moved to the front of the bus to exit near the driver, hoping it would feel safer. That was a mistake. The man slipped out the back door, and I only noticed after I'd walked a few yards. He had this wide, creepy grin and mirrored my every move. If I stepped to the right, he did the same. I knew he wasn't a neighbor, and I could tell he was up to no good. I started walking faster, almost running, but he closed the distance quickly with his long strides. Panic set in. I knew no one would be home. My mom and grandparents were out and wouldn't be back for another 3 hours. I pulled out my phone and typed 911, ready to call if he tried anything. Then I noticed cars at a neighbor's house, one with a big family who often had relatives over. I veered into their driveway a block from my house. The man shifted sideways to match my movements, still grinning, and slowly passed behind another neighbor's hedges. I was terrified, frozen with fear, standing among my neighbor's cars, clutching my phone, ready to dial. But I didn't call the police, and I never told my family about it, a decision I regret to this day. After about 15 minutes, with the sun starting to set, I crept to the edge of the driveway and saw him a block away, facing the opposite direction. He was just standing there, hands on his hips, staring into the distance. He stayed like that for another 5 to 10 minutes. Not wanting to risk him turning back, I bolted for my house. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, and even as I reached my driveway, he was still in the same spot, motionless, staring at nothing. I never saw him again after that. A week later, though, my university sent out a security alert that sent chills down my spine. It described an older white man who had stalked 2 foreign freshman female students to their shared apartment just days before my incident. He'd stood next to them, refusing to leave even as they yelled at him to go away, demanding they open their door. Thankfully, they called the police, and he fled. For weeks, the police searched the island for him until they finally caught him. It turned out he had a history of stalking women and had been convicted of raping one. That experience taught me not to hesitate to call someone or even the police when my gut tells me something's wrong. It's not an inconvenience. It wasn't until 6 years later that I realized my ethnicity likely made me a target. I fit his type of prey. Thinking about it still gives me the creeps. This happened while I was out riding my bike around my neighborhood. We live in a quiet, suburban area where nothing bad or strange ever seems to happen, so it's usually a safe place to be. It was about 5:30 p.m., and I'd ridden into the neighborhood right next to ours. As I was pedaling along, I spotted a small, skinny puppy. Think of something like Boo. that tiny dog, since I'm not great with dog breeds. It was wearing a pink collar and didn't look lost, so I figured it was near at home. I kept riding, not thinking much of it. About 9 minutes later, I circled back through the same spot, and the puppy was still there, sitting in the same place. I assumed it must live at that house. But no sooner had I slowed down than a Ford Freestyle came around a corner and pulled up right in front of me. A man stepped out, and instantly every alarm in my head went off. He looked to be in his mid to late 50s, with a rough, unsettling vibe, like someone you'd cross the street to avoid. "Is this your house?" he asked in a low, flat voice. No, sir, it's not," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Are the owners home?" he pressed. I could smell cigarette smoke on his breath. Glancing at the driveway, I noticed there were no cars parked there. "I don't think so," I said. "Oh, okay." "Is this your dog?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. "No," I answered, feeling more uneasy by the second. "Oh," he said again, but this time there was something excited, almost sick about the way he said it that made my stomach churn. I decided I needed to get out of there. "Okay, well, bye," I mumbled, starting to pedal away. "Goodbye," he called after me. I glanced back and saw the puppy looking at me, its little face nervous and uncertain. For a moment, I tried to convince myself he might just be someone harmless, like an air conditioning repair guy or something random. It was a weird conclusion, I know, but I was scared and grasping for excuses to leave. About 10 minutes later, I rode back to check on the puppy, hoping my gut was wrong. When I got there, I saw cars in the driveway and felt a wave of relief, thinking the owners must be home. But as I got closer, my heart sank. The front windows of the house were smashed, and the owner's car was battered to hell. I reached for my phone to call the police, but then I noticed something on the ground, a pink circular object. It was the puppy's collar. My chest tightened. Just as I was about to dial 911, I heard sirens. The police arrived faster than I could have imagined. Guess the Oro Valley sheriffs don't mess around. A full SWAT team showed up moments later. They kicked in the already broken front door and were met with a horrific sight, a severed arm and leg. To sum it up, the man had murdered the family and the puppy. They found the puppy's severed head in the toilet. I rode home, shaking, trying to calm myself down. I hated myself for not doing something when I saw that suspicious man, for not stopping him from hurting that poor family and their dog. As far as I know, the police never caught the bastard. What kills me to this day is the memory of looking back at that puppy, its innocent, skinny face staring right at me, like it was pleading for help. This happened about a month and a half ago. I'm 24 and live in Albuquerque, where we have a massive mountain called the Sandia, part of the Rockies, that sits right against the east side of the city. I'm an avid rock climber and hiker, and I'm not usually afraid of the dark. This past summer, I started doing night hikes because the warm evenings and clear skies made for stunning, almost surreal views. One night, I decided to drive around to the back of the mountain to find a spot a friend had mentioned, since the backside is an easier climb to the top. I parked in a dirt lot off a dirt road, hoping it was the right place, but it wasn't. Still, I decided to stay because there were no other cars around, and the trail I found led to the summit. So I started hiking. It was about 3.5 miles from my car to the top, and I reached it around 11 p.m. By then, I'd lost all cell service, but everything was going fine. The night was beautiful. I could see the city lights sparkling below and the stars stretching endlessly above. I found a fire pit, probably left by campers, and decided to rest there. I didn't light a fire since it was still around 90 degrees. Instead, I sat on one of the logs nearby, sipping water and soaking in the peace. About an hour later, while I was gazing at the stars, I heard voices and saw a light approaching from the distance. At first, I figured it was just campers heading to the fire pit, since it was the only one I'd seen for miles near the summit. I packed up my stuff, ready to move along and give them space. But as the group got closer, I noticed something odd. Only a couple of them had flashlights, the rest were carrying what looked like torches, straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. That felt off, so I slipped about 30 feet away to a rock formation where I could stay out of sight and get a better look. As they reached the spot where I'd been sitting, I could only make out shadows at first, which I chalked up to their lights messing with my night-adjusted eyes. They took a minute to get a fire going, which wasn't hard since they'd brought their own wood and used the torches to light it. Once the flames were up, I could see why they'd been hard to make out. They were all dressed head to toe in black robes. The robes had some kind of symbol on the chest I couldn't quite discern, and they were hooded, with only small eye holes visible. Among them was one girl, held by two of the figures, with a black sack over her head. They tied her to the tree closest to the fire. By this point, I could see there were about 12 to 15 hooded figures gathered around. They removed the sack from her head, revealing a gag, which they also took off. She immediately started pleading for her life, her voice desperate. I edged closer, staying just outside the fire's light, wondering if I could do something to help her. Then I noticed two of the hooded figures were carrying guns, black against their black robes, hard to make out, but unmistakable. I froze, my mind racing. As I stood there in the dead silence, trying to figure out my next move, one of the figures pulled out a knife. The others finished setting up for what looked like some kind of ritual. The one with the knife approached the girl and started cutting her, collecting her blood in some sort of cup. Her scream, bone-chilling and raw, echoed through the night, a sound I'll never forget. I stepped back, ready to retreat, when I accidentally snapped a stick underfoot. The noise was loud enough that someone swung a flashlight in my direction. I crept back quietly, moving further away as one of the figures came to investigate. By the time they reached the spot, I was another 20 feet back, crouched behind a rock. I waited, barely breathing, until they returned to the group. Then I started circling around to another trail, moving as fast as I could while staying silent, desperate to get away. I glanced back one last time before the fire faded from view. It looked like they were peeling off her skin and throwing it into the flames, but I didn't stop to confirm. I just kept moving. I didn't know how to get back to my car from the new trail, and going back the way I came meant passing close to them again, which I wasn't willing to risk. So I hiked half a mile away and climbed a tree where I could still see the fire in the distance. I stayed there until morning, waiting until I was certain they were gone. When I finally passed by the fire pit on my way back to my car, the bloodstains on the tree almost looked natural, like they could have been anything else. But I knew better. Not saving that girl will haunt me for the rest of my life. This happened when I was 16 years old. My girlfriend at the time, her friend Kelly, my best friend Chris, and I were hanging out at our school in my small hometown. There's not much to do around here, so we were just chilling. As it started getting dark, a beat-up green SUV pulled up across the street. A girl got out and walked toward a house known for drug activity, leaving a guy who I assumed was her boyfriend in the car. He kept staring at us, and I figured he was checking out my girlfriend. I didn't think much of it, as long as he stayed away. A few minutes later, my uncle rode by on his bicycle. He's 40, doesn't drive, and lives with his mom. Sometimes I tease him a bit for fun. As he passed, I called out in a goofy voice, "Slow down, speed racer." We're all going to end up at the same place anyway. My uncle ignored me as usual and kept pedaling. But right then, the guy from the SUV got out, walked over, and said, "Hey, you little punk, you shouldn't mess with people you don't know." I could tell he was trying to show off for the girls, which was weird since we were 16, and he looked at least 20. "Relax, man," I said. "He's my uncle." "I was just joking around." "I don't give a shit," he snapped. "Do you know who I am?" My girlfriend started to get scared and moved closer to me. He kept going, "I know you. You're Eric's little brother, aren't you?" As soon as he mentioned my brother, I knew things could turn bad. My brother was mixed up with gangs and dealing drugs, stuff I stayed away from. Whenever I ran into someone who knew him, it rarely ended well. But I wasn't about to back down either. At 16, I was 6 feet 1 inch, 185 pounds, wrestled varsity for a 6-time state championship team, and had a reputation as a fighter. People usually avoided tangling with me. Plus, with my girlfriend and friends there, I was in full protective mode. The guy wasn't even that big. "Why don't you go back to your car and mind your own business, Mighty Mouse?" I said, sizing him up. He stepped closer. "You're a little shit, just like your brother." That got me heated. I stood up straight from leaning on Chris's car and started walking toward him. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back. I don't think the guy realized how big I was because he flinched and took a step back as I got closer. Then he pulled out a switchblade. It was the second time that week someone had pulled a knife on me, so I wasn't in the mood to play nice. "Chris, pop the trunk," I said calmly. Chris knew exactly what I meant. He opened the trunk and tossed me a golf club. I slammed it against the pavement and roared, "Come on," like some kind of wild animal. Normally, I keep my cool, but nobody threatens my friends or disrespects my family. The guy's eyes widened. He turned and bolted back to the SUV just as his girlfriend came running out of the house. They jumped in and peeled out. As they sped past, he made a gun gesture with his hand and pointed it at me. My adrenaline was pumping, but my girlfriend was shaken. She said she didn't even recognize me in that moment. I think it rattled her too much because we broke up a few days later. She never saw me the same way after that. Fast forward 6 months. Me and a couple of friends had been up all night playing Call of Duty and decided to walk a mile from my house to the gas station for snacks and soda, since the store nearby was closed. On the way back, we were carrying our bags and passed by the junkyard. A big Rottweiler came charging out, barking at us. I tossed it a piece of jerky and it calmed down. But about 100 feet later, it started barking again. I looked back and saw a guy in a hoodie who had pulled over his head, walking behind us and gaining fast. Something in my gut screamed that we were in danger. "James," I said, handing him the bags I was carrying, "hold these." We kept walking like we hadn't noticed anything, but I was on high alert. I told James, "If he tries something, run, call the cops, and get my dad. Don't worry about me." James is one of my best friends, but he's no fighter. The guy was closing in 25 feet, 20, 10, 5. The second I felt him get within striking distance, I spun around and threw a hook, putting all my weight into it. The punch landed square on his jaw. He stumbled back and I grabbed his arm, yanking it over my shoulder and flipping him onto the ground, dislocating his shoulder and dropping him hard on his head. As he rolled in pain, I saw a gun tucked in his belt. I snatched it before he could reach for it, checked the magazine. It was loaded, and kept it trained on him. I held him there while James ran to my house to call the cops. When they arrived, they cuffed him and pulled back his hood. It was the same guy from that night at the school. He looked me dead in the eyes and snarled, "I'm gonna kill you, you punk." They hauled him off, and he went to prison for a while. I've since joined the Marines, but before I left, and after he got out, I ran into him a couple times around town. Either he doesn't remember me, or he doesn't want to test me again. Either way, I never took my eyes off him whenever I saw him. About 3 years ago, during the summer when I was 12 years old, my mom and I loved going bike riding together on different trails as often as we could. We discovered this beautiful trail that wound through a somewhat wooded area, hidden from the street. Since I was pretty short back then, we'd ride back and forth along the path multiple times. One day, I decided to speed ahead of my mom. When I reached the end of the trail, where we'd usually turn around for another lap, I noticed a woman standing near a bench. She looked to be in her 60s, her clothes tattered and dirty. Normally, something like that would have scared the hell out of me, but I felt okay because I saw a kid and his dad nearby. Then the woman spoke to me, saying, "Sir, please stop. Sir, please." I've been raised to be cautious about strangers, so I decided to keep going. I turned my bike around and raced back toward where my mom was coming from. As I passed her, I shouted for her to stop, but she didn't hear me. I was too frightened to go back for her because of the woman, so I pedaled straight to the start of the trail where our car was parked and waited. I sat there for about 10 minutes, my stomach churning with unease. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, but more like a sense that something awful was happening. Finally, my mom came into view on her bike, her face pale and etched with worry. When she reached me, she said, "Thank God you're okay." I asked her what was going on, and she explained that the woman had told her she'd just been raped. My mom asked her when it happened, and the woman said it was recent. Naturally, my mom rushed to find me to make sure I was safe and hadn't been taken or hurt. We rode back to where the woman was and called the police. When they arrived, They told my mom to step back since she'd been comforting the woman. To our shock, they put the woman in handcuffs. My mom was confused and upset, but an officer explained that they recognized her. Apparently, she had recently escaped from a mental institution, had a history of violence, and was schizophrenic. While all this was unfolding, a kid, probably around 16 years old, came up to me out of nowhere and started talking. He said he lived nearby and asked where I lived. I told him it wasn't too far from there. It struck me as a strange and unsettling way to start a conversation, but I didn't think much of it since the police were just a few yards away. After that, the officers asked me where I'd first seen the woman and other details like that. Once they were done, we started walking back to our car to head home, rattled by the whole experience. But then something odd happened. The kid I'd been talking to began following us along the trail. He kept trying to make small talk, but the way he was looking at my mom and me with his creepy, almost sickening smile made my skin crawl. He seemed like he was up to something, like he had some hidden motive. By the time we reached the car, he said goodbye with a sly grin, and we drove off. As we pulled away, I finally let go of the tension I'd been holding in, trying to act normal around him. I nearly broke down crying, telling my mom I thought the kid was going to rob us or something worse. My mom, though, had a darker feeling. She thought he might have had something far more sinister in mind. This happened a few years ago, right across the street from my house in our quiet little neighborhood. To this day, we're still not entirely sure what went down. The local news in our town is pretty useless. You'll hear more about festivals than anything important, so it's no surprise we were left in the dark. There was this woman who lived across from us, someone we always found a bit odd because of her quirky gardening habits. She became the subject of plenty of jokes in our house. She'd water her lawn during rainstorms, let her weeds grow wild before mowing them, to the annoyance of my dad and our next-door neighbor, and wrap tinfoil around the base of her trees to keep bugs away. One thing she did that really stood out was mowing her lawn in the dead of night. Now, that wasn't too strange since it gets scorching hot during the day, and some folks mow in the evenings to avoid the heat. But 11 p.m., that's pushing it. Because of this, we nicknamed her the night mower in our household. Truth be told, she was a kind woman. But there was something else about her that unsettled my family. Not her personally, but the guys she hired to help with her yard. They were a rough-looking bunch, the kind who seemed like they might have been mixed up in some serious drug stuff, either back then or still. From what we gathered, at least one of them was related to her, and the others were his buddies. They were always around, working in her yard. We didn't dislike her, she never bothered us directly, and her quirks were more of a minor nuisance. But those guys hanging around her place, they gave us the creeps. They never did anything outright wrong that we knew of, but they just had this shady vibe, maybe a bit redneck too. My dad swears he once saw one of them taking a leak in her garden, right by the road in front of our house. The guy at least tried to cover himself, but still, it was bold. Everything came to a head one Saturday morning. I was lounging in my pajamas in the living room with my family, while my parents sipped their coffee and chatted. My dad happened to open our wooden front door to peek out through the glass one and froze. "Oh my gosh," he said, startled. We all turned to look and saw that the night mower's house was engulfed in flames. Neighbors gathered in their yards to watch, and someone called the fire department. After staring for a bit, I went back inside to read. I know that sounds cold, but I figured she'd probably left the house and forgotten to unplug something that sparked the fire. I thought the worst-case scenario was just property damage. It didn't cross my mind that something darker could have happened, not in our small town. But the truth was far worse, and it's chilling to think this went down right across the street without us knowing. When the police arrived, they found our neighbor's body inside the house. I don't know all the details, but it was clear she'd been murdered. Someone had set her house on fire to cover it up. I managed to find a short article online, but like I said, our local news is pathetic, and there was no follow-up. All we've pieced together comes from bits the police were willing to share. What I do know is that one of the men who worked in her yard was suspected, put on trial, and later executed. That's all the article said. It didn't give much, and there was nothing more to find. What happened to that poor woman was awful. It took a long time for anyone to buy that house after it was fixed up, probably because of what went down. It's strange to think something so horrific happened right next to us to someone we knew. I just hope the new owners have better luck than she did. This is a story about my friend Josh, who lives up in northern Washington. He's about 23 now, but this happened when he was just 8 or 9, and it's left a deep mark on him, making him less social and distant from almost everyone. Back then, he lived in a quiet, secluded country town with his dog, his dad, and his mom, who was often away for work. His dad was dealing with job troubles, so he stayed home to look after Josh in the house. They'd been there for years, but Josh started waking up late at night, feeling uneasy for no clear reason. A few weeks later, his dad was woken up by their dog, Rex, going wild. He managed to calm Rex down, but later that night, when he got up to use the bathroom, he saw a man standing in the middle of the field near their house. It freaked him out. Nobody usually came around that isolated area. He watched the guy for a bit before heading back to bed, but then he noticed Rex wasn't in his usual spot. Panicked, he grabbed his rifle and ran outside, thinking the guy might have taken the dog. He found nothing. At dawn, he searched the field again, only to stumble across Rex's body, nearly headless. It hit him hard. He buried Rex quickly and told Josh the dog had run off chasing something. Josh was heartbroken but held out hope Rex would come back. For the next 2 weeks, Josh's dad got up every night around the same time, staring out the window. Sure enough, there was the same guy standing near the tree line, just watching the house. It got to him. Fed up, he called some buddies to help search for the creep. They set up tents in the field, keeping watch. One night, his dad spotted the guy again, lurking at the edge of the woods. He and his 3 friends went into the forest to track him down, but after 2 hours, they found nothing. One buddy bailed early, pale and shaken, saying something had nearly gotten him out there, but refusing to explain. Josh's dad told his wife everything, and she grew worried about their safety. She asked the sheriff to check things out, but that night the guy showed up again, this time screaming and yelling like something unhinged. Josh's dad had had enough. He grabbed his gun, ready to confront the guy. Josh woke up, startled by the noises. His dad told him he was going to look for Rex, but Josh said something else was wrong. His dad asked him to shine a flashlight toward the woods and stay on the porch until he got back. Just as he was lacing up his boots, the guy let out another wild screech. Josh's dad muttered something like, "You're done, you creepy bastard," and sprinted toward the tree line. Josh kept the light on the forest for hours, scared and worried sick. Around 6 a.m., his mom got home with the sheriff. She panicked when she realized her husband wasn't answering his phone and found Josh still on the porch. Josh told her his dad had gone into the woods looking for Rex. She sent Josh to bed and frantically filled the sheriff in. The sheriff called for backup and searched the forest. Days passed, and they found only his dad's glasses, wallet, and a shredded but clean jacket. They kept looking for another week. At the far end of the forest, near a fallen tree, they found his rifle and a bloody, torn boot. They listed him as missing, not dead, since there wasn't enough evidence to say for sure. On the last day, the sheriff went out alone and saw someone across the river that ran through the forest. The guy was crouched, eating something, and bolted when he spotted the sheriff. The river kept them apart, so the sheriff couldn't do much. He told Josh's mom, and soon after, she moved him out of that house, still haunted by not knowing what happened to Josh's dad. I heard about a month ago that Josh went back to that town with a friend during a business trip. His friend checked out the old house and came back rattled, saying they needed to leave. The place was boarded up, but he swore he saw someone moving inside with a lamp. My name's Peter, and I'm 19 now, but this happened a few years back when I was around 11. That summer, my older brother landed his first job as a groundskeeper at our church, working every Saturday. It was a massive rural property, way too much for a 14-year-old to handle alone, so our parents always went along to help and drive him. I could tag along if I wanted to pitch in, and they'd give me a little money for my efforts. My job was simple, picking up sticks so the lawnmower wouldn't hit them and get damaged. That meant I was off and off on my own while my family mowed the sprawling lawns in the distance. One day, I was gathering sticks near the fence at the edge of the property, right by the parking lot, when a man got out of his car and walked toward me. He started talking. He was tall, not just in my 11-year-old eyes, but really tall, and looked pretty ordinary. I didn't recognize him from church, though. He leaned against the fence from the other side and waved me over. I paused what I was doing and looked at him. He flashed a friendly smile and asked politely where the Heritage Museum was. Now, the church grounds were huge, and the museum was a small building on the property, not far from the church itself, but on the opposite side. It had its own driveway and a clear sign, hard to miss for anyone paying attention. I told him it was just down the road and that he'd see the sign. His smile faded, and he looked stressed, asking me again where it was. I was puzzled. To me, it seemed obvious, and I couldn't figure out why he needed my help. I repeated myself, pointing in the direction he should go. Then he asked if I could show him the way, motioning for me to come over and walk with him. Even though he was on the other side of the fence, the parking lot entrance was close by, maybe 7 or 10 steps, and then there'd be nothing between us. He was closer than I liked. I wasn't picking up any red flags yet, just a kid assuming this guy needed help. But something in me didn't want to go with him, not because I suspected anything, but because I figured I should stick to my job. That day, an event at the church had just wrapped up, and a few people were still outside chatting. I pointed toward the church, which wasn't too far, close enough that I could have shouted and been heard, and said there were folks over there who could help show him the way. The man glanced up when I mentioned the crowd, like he hadn't noticed them before. I think I saw his mouth open, maybe to say something else, but he just muttered, "Never mind," turned around and walked back to his car. He drove off, not toward the museum, but in the opposite direction. It wasn't until years later that I realized how shady that whole encounter was. The museum's location was plain as day, yet this grown man got out of his car to ask a kid who was all alone. I'm pretty sure he knew my family was too far off to hear me over the lawnmower's noise. If he'd wanted to, it wouldn't have taken him long to walk around that fence. If I'd gone with him, or if that church event hadn't been happening, or if I hadn't pointed out the people nearby, I don't think I'd be here today. It's scary to think something like that happened to me, and I didn't even see it for what it was until much later. I guess when you spend enough time alone outside in the dark, you're bound to run into some creepy stuff. One night, I was out trying to photograph the Perseid meteor shower. After dropping off a friend who joined me for a bit, I thought about heading home but decided to go back to Houston Woods to see if I could catch a meteor shot. The sky was crystal clear, and I saw several meteors streak across in different colors, pretty breathtaking. But I also saw things I can't quite explain. If you stare at the stars long enough, you notice the Earth's movement as they drift slowly across the sky. They barely shift from one minute to the next. So when two pinpoints of light, identical to the stars around them, started moving together, it was impossible to miss. These two white lights, with no other colors or flickering, stayed a fixed distance apart, gliding at about a 45-degree angle to the ground. They moved steadily across the sky without curving, passing the midway point, about 45 degrees from the horizon, halfway between the ground and straight up. This made me think it couldn't be a plane seen from below. Given how small the lights looked, they were high up, blending perfectly with the stars. The wild part? I've been staring at that patch of sky for an hour, and those lights had been sitting there, unnoticed, until they moved. They traveled mostly in a straight line before suddenly dipping downward and vanishing. The whole thing took about 5 minutes, and my jaw was on the ground. I've been floored by meteors already, but this was something else. While I had my camera set up for 33-second exposures on auto, I was lying on the ground, just soaking in the sky. About 10 minutes into shooting, I heard a loud thud, followed by several knocking sounds. It was so jarring that my eyes watered, and my heart started racing. I've been hearing coyotes howling and barking in the woods all night, but that hadn't fazed me. This was different. Whatever made that noise hadn't crept up quietly, and it wasn't making any sound after the initial racket. Spooked, I grabbed my gear, tossed it into the car, and used my camera's flash in test mode to light up the area as I packed up. I didn't see anything, but when I pulled out of the spot, I noticed the trash bin I'd passed on my way in was gone. It was big enough for me to fit inside. I'm pretty sure the thud was the sound of it being knocked over, but those knocks? No clue. Whatever took that bin was strong enough to move it and fast enough to clear the area in under a minute. You couldn't even walk to the edge of the woods that quickly. Something hauled off an entire trash bin without being seen or making a sound. I got the hell out of there as fast as I could. The 30-minute drive home didn't make things any less eerie. Every single car I passed, and I mean everyone, did the same bizarre thing. Just before we passed each other, they'd stop dead in the middle of the road, flick on their high beams, and stay there. I'd see their brake lights in my rear view as they came to a complete halt. Even a cop car I passed, parked on the side of the road, pulled out behind me, followed for a few seconds, then stopped in the middle of the road with its brights on. This happened with maybe 10 cars total. I didn't see any deer or animals crossing to explain it. I can't wrap my head around why all these people would just stop like that in the middle of the night. For context, these roads are long, straight stretches through farm country with higher speed limits than city streets. What the hell was going on that night? Let me start by saying I'm a female college student, and my school has a reputation for being a big party school. I've never really been into that scene, though. Even back in high school, I didn't see the point of it all, and after what happened at my last party, I have even more reason to steer clear. This took place during my first semester as a freshman. I'm a chemistry major, and I met most of my friends through labs and lectures. But along with the good company, I also encountered my fair share of creeps. I'm not used to being the center of anyone's attention. I never have been, and I don't see why I should be. I prefer keeping my circle small, staying in the background, and enjoying my own company. But a new state comes with new rules, and creeps were part of the deal. One of those creeps was a guy named Tom, who was in my chemistry lecture. From day one, he seemed fixated on me. At first, I'd just catch him staring when I glanced over my shoulder to check the clock. He always made a point to sit behind me. I'd give a polite smile, turn back around, and try to shrug it off. It was creepy, but not outright alarming at that point. After a couple of weeks, he worked up the nerve to talk to me. I was raised to never be rude or ignore someone speaking to me, so I played nice, even though I wasn't interested. I don't know why I felt so uneasy about him at first. He seemed friendly enough when he spoke, but something in my gut told me things were off. Soon, I started seeing him everywhere, even in places I knew he wasn't supposed to be, like classes he didn't take. I tried everything to give him the hint, avoiding him, switching seats in lecture, shutting down his attempts at conversation. Unfortunately, I'm not very confrontational, and I couldn't bring myself to flat out tell him to back off. He didn't seem to pick up on my signals either. My friends teased me about it, saying I had an admirer, and I'd laugh it off, but deep down, it really unsettled me. He was starting to insert himself into my life, and I didn't know how to handle it. One time, just after Thanksgiving break, I was studying outside at a picnic table when, sure enough, Tom showed up. He started asking about my break, how my family was, if I was glad to be back. Then he asked how Bruno and Riley were. Bruno and Riley are my dogs, and while I love showing them off, I knew for a fact I'd never mentioned them to him or shown him any pictures. My rational side reminded me that Riley was my phone's lock screen, so maybe he'd seen her when I checked the time, and Bruno was my wallpaper, so he could have glimpsed him too. But how did he know their names? When I pressed him on it, he got nervous and tried to convince me I'd told him. When I insisted I hadn't, he made some excuse and walked away. I should have done something then, maybe gone to campus security, but I didn't. I regret that now. I thought I could deal with it myself. I've never been good at asking for help. Fast forward a bit, and Tom started getting weirder. He kept asking for my phone number, trying to ask me out, pushing me to invite him to my dorm. He got aggressive about it. Eventually, I reached a point where my ingrained politeness went out the window. I told him as gently as I could, because I don't like hurting people's feelings, that I wasn't interested in a relationship with him or anyone else right now. He lost it. He yelled at me, accused me of leading him on, called me a bitch, a slut, a tease, and then stormed off. After that, he started texting me nonstop, saying how much he hated me, how I deserved to die. I still have no idea how he got my number. You're probably thinking I went to the police or campus security at this point, right? No, I was an idiot. I'm not a confident person as it is, and some tiny part of me felt guilty, like maybe I had led him on somehow. I didn't even tell anyone about the texts. I just deleted them, convincing myself that if I ignored him long enough, he'd give up and go away. I was a naive 18-year-old, and I let it slide. About a month later, it was nearing the end of the semester, close to winter break. My friend Anna had just gone through a breakup, and she and my other friend Tori wanted to go out for drinks to take their minds off things. Tori and Anna are both tiny, and they're total lightweights, known for making awful decisions after just a couple of beers. They begged me to come along and keep an eye on them. I agreed and brought my own water bottle so I wouldn't have to drink anything there. Even the water at those parties made me nervous. The three of us went to the party. While Tori and Anna hit the drinks, I parked myself on a couch in the corner, sipped my water, and kept watch. We'd been there about 3 hours when someone sat down next to me. I looked over, and of course it was Tom. He seemed completely drunk already and started rambling, slurring about how sorry he was, how much he missed me, how he'd overreacted, how he wished he could take it all back. He asked if we could hang out later. I told him no and to leave me alone, but he kept pushing. After another 10 minutes of this, I spotted Anna across the room, stumbling drunk and about to wander off with some guy. I got up after telling Tom again to back off and went to pull Anna away from the guy, who was way less drunk and clearly looking to take advantage of her. I grabbed Tori and we regrouped. I tried to convince them we should leave, but they begged to stay a bit longer to dance. There's no arguing with those two when they're drunk, so I gave in. When I went back to the couch, Tom was gone. What happened next I only pieced together later because my memory gets fuzzy and some parts are just gone. I must have left my water bottle on the couch when I went to get Anna. After taking a few more sips, I started feeling strange, really dizzy and shaky. I decided it was time to go. I rounded up Anna and Tori, and we left, probably taking the bus back to the dorm. When I woke up, I was in my bed, still in my clothes from the night before, with the worst headache of my life. I couldn't remember anything after starting to feel weird. My roommate said I'd stumbled in around 2 a.m., collapsed into bed, and passed out, mumbling about not feeling well. She was surprised since she knew I didn't drink, but figured I'd let loose and overdone it. It hit me then, Tom had drugged my water. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew he was a creep, but I never thought he'd go that far. The thought of what he might have planned sent chills down my spine. As if to confirm my fears, when I checked my phone, I had a new text from Tom. It read, "Why did you leave so early last night? I had such a night planned for you." I stopped going out after that, not just to parties, but even to classes. I told my friends and professors I was sick and got the last week's notes from them. After finals and the break, I came back to campus and learned that Tom had flunked out. While he was busy stalking me, he neglected his classes and failed. I haven't been to a party since, and I don't plan to anytime soon. Let me start by saying I'm 19 years old, about 5 feet 7 inches, and decently built. I've been boxing since I was 10 and started MMA when I was 15, so I'm not huge, but I can hold my own in a fight. I work at a supermarket, and we get some odd customers now and then, but nothing compares to this one guy. It all started when I was in the back stocking shelves. I got called to come up to the front, and I mean quick. I jogged up there and saw my coworker Emily, a girl I work with, arguing with some older guy. They were really going at it, yelling back and forth. This dude looked about 60, and he didn't seem like your typical creep at first glance, but I'd soon find out how wrong that impression was. I walked up with another coworker, Dane, and we broke things up. The guy left, and we asked Emily what happened. She said he'd come up to her and asked where the condoms were. She told him they'd be over by the health supplies, pointing him in the right direction. But then he said something that set her off. "Well, you want to help me try some on?" She called him a damn creep, told him that was uncalled for, and then he had the nerve to run his hand through her hair. That's when she lost it, and started yelling. Dane and I tried to calm her down. He won't be back, I said, trying to sound reassuring. Yeah, if he shows up again, he'll regret it, Dane added. Things settled down, and the rest of the night was quiet. The next day, though, I saw that creep again. I didn't tell anyone, but I decided to keep an eye on him. I followed him through the store and watched what he bought. Duct tape, rope, a gas can, a pocket knife, a camera, gloves, a notebook, and a pack of Sharpies. It struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. At the end of my shift, I was out collecting carts with Dane, heading to my car, when I noticed something on my windshield. I thought it was a ticket at first, hadn't done anything wrong, so what gives? But it wasn't a ticket. It was a piece of paper torn from a notebook, and it read, "Next time, stay out of my business. That's not yours. That is, if you ever want to see the sunlight again. You can't stop love." I was reading it when Dane ran up, looking rattled. He said he had a note on his car too, and when he showed it to me, it was the same exact message. We were both freaked out. "What the hell is wrong with this guy?" I said. Dane's face got red, and he snapped, "If I see this creep, I'm gonna beat his ass." I tried to think straight. "Dane, you can't just pound him. Legally, he hasn't done anything we can prove, and we don't even know for sure he wrote this." Dane didn't care. "I don't give a damn," he said, then got in his car and peeled out. I brushed it off as best I could, went back to my apartment, and crashed for the night. The next day at work, I saw the guy again, sitting in his car with that camera he'd bought. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I walked up, tapped on his window, and he looked startled. "You taking pictures of Emily, you damn creep?" I said. He didn't say a word, just floored it out of the parking lot, nearly hitting a couple of cars on his way. The rest of the day was uneventful, and after a long shift, I got back to my little one-bedroom apartment, made some dinner, and settled in to watch TV. Then I heard a knock at my door. My mind went straight to that creep. I crept up to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Then there was this flicker, like someone was covering the hole with their finger. I froze, and I heard his voice. "You and I both know you're right behind that door. Come on, I told you not to get involved in my business." My legs went weak, and I could barely breathe. Then he said, "The note on your car? Come on, can't we talk face to face, Matt? How the hell did he know my name?" I checked the peephole again. Nothing. He must have walked off. I slumped down, my heart racing, trying to figure out what to do. I barely slept that night. By morning, I was pissed. Screw it, I thought. I'm going to work, and if he shows up, I'm laying him out. I was fired up, even stretched before leaving in case things got physical. I drove to work, scanned the parking lot as I walked in, and saw nothing suspicious. The day dragged on, and I was starting to think maybe he'd backed off. But as I was walking to my car after my shift, I heard a muffled noise. I looked around, nothing. Then I heard it again, louder, like someone saying help, followed by more muffled sounds. I circled my car and froze. There was that creep, and Emily was on the ground, her legs tied up, duct tape over her mouth. What the hell? I shouted, charging over. I shoved him hard, knocking him away from her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out that pocket knife. I've been boxing most of my life, but I never faced someone with a knife. He told me to leave, said he'd spare me if I did. Hell no. I shot back, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "Get out of my face, or you're done." For a split second, he glanced away, and that was all I needed. I threw a jab as hard and fast as I could, followed by a cross. My coach always called it the money punch. I stepped in, threw another jab, then an elbow, then my left, and wound up for a massive overhand right. It landed square, and he dropped like a sack. His head hit the pavement, and he was out. Emily had managed to rip the duct tape off her mouth since her hands weren't tied, and she untied her legs, screaming for help. Some lady nearby called the cops. I held the guy down until they showed up. They ran his info, and here's the kicker, nothing came up. No prior arrests, no record of kidnapping, assault, nothing. Emily hasn't been back to work since, and I don't blame her. If I hadn't heard her muffled screams, I don't want to think about what could have happened. Looking back, It all clicked why he bought that stuff. The duct tape was for Emily's mouth, the rope to tie her up, the knife to threaten her, or worse. The Sharpies and notebook were for those creepy notes on our cars. The camera was probably so he could take pictures of her. The gloves were to avoid leaving fingerprints, and I'm guessing the gas was so he could drive her somewhere far off. So here's my advice. Always pay attention to what's going on around you. This story didn't happen to me directly, but I was there right after it went down with a close friend of mine. When he told me and his brother about it, it was such a wild, almost unbelievable tale, but the fear in his eyes and the way he was shaking convinced me he was telling the truth. He's never been the type to make stuff up either. For simplicity, I'll tell it exactly as he shared it with us. Guys, I'm freaking out. The most messed up thing just happened, and I don't even know how to explain it. He was a wreck, barely able to get the words out. We calmed him down enough to get the full story. This took place in Minnesota during winter, where we've got a lot of paths cutting through the woods. Here's how it went, in his own words. I was walking home along the usual path like I always do. I got to the spot where there's a bench and the path splits. There was this girl sitting there by herself, hood up, hands kind of trembling, staring at the ground. I figured she was just a meth head. There's plenty of them around here, so I didn't think much of it. But as I passed her, even though her head was down, it followed me, like she was tracking me without looking up. It was weird, but I brushed it off and kept going. About 10 feet past her, I glanced back and she was gone. No way she could have disappeared that fast. I would have heard her moving. The snow crunches loud out there. I started walking quicker. Then I saw 2 more people up ahead. They looked like teenage girls, both with their hoods up, wearing identical outfits, brown coats and jeans. They had similar builds, but one was at least 5 inches shorter than the other. I couldn't figure out why so many people were out here. It was freezing, almost dark, and this path is usually empty. I couldn't see their faces clearly, so I kept my distance. But when I got a few feet away, they both turned and looked at me. He paused here, struggling to keep talking. Their eyes, they were completely black. No whites, no color, just solid black. I started to panic. They didn't say a word, just kept walking, and then I heard them giggle, the creepiest damn giggle you can imagine. I sped up, trying to calm myself down. Didn't want to slip on the snow and ice. I was almost at the end of the path when the most insane thing I've ever seen happened. There was this big tree with a branch hanging over the trail, and sitting on that branch were 2 boys. Their legs were dangling, heads tilted to the side, and their faces were blank, like they weren't even there. And their eyes black, just like the girls. I froze for a second, not knowing what to do. I couldn't turn back. I was only 5 minutes from home. So I started walking fast. As I passed under them, one of the boys spoke in this weird, flat voice. "Want to come play with us?" It sounds cheesy now, but that's what he said. I ignored it and kept moving. Then I heard it again, louder, angrier, like a command. "Come play with us." I bolted, sprinting as fast as I could without slipping. I didn't stop until I got here. I'm never taking that damn path again. I'll take the long way around from now on. When he finished, none of us knew what to say. Why would he make something like that up? We'd been in a good mood, just waiting for him to get home so we could kick back with some beers, weed, and video games. But he was so shaken, he spent the rest of the night holed up in his room. We ended up watching some comedy movies to lighten the mood, but it didn't really help. I wasn't there, so I'll never know if it's true, but my friend's a big, buff 6-foot guy, and I've never seen anyone look so terrified. I'll never forget the fear in his eyes as he told us. Needless to say, we all avoid that path now. I knew this guy when I was 18. He was my first boyfriend. When we met, I didn't like him much at first, but my confidence was pretty low back then, and he came across as a nice guy. I was still a virgin, and he was patient with me. No pressure, no pushing. When I said no, he respected it, which I appreciated. One day, I asked him if he'd ever broken the law. He admitted he had, but wouldn't tell me what he'd done. We were together for about 2 months before we broke up. There wasn't any love left between us, just nothing there anymore. Somehow, though, we stayed friends. I had a lot of guy friends back then, and he was one of them. One time, I had to spend the night in his city, and he offered to share his single bed with me. I thought it was really kind of him. In the middle of the night, his hand wandered to my chest, but when I said no, he stopped right away. I was surprised by his self-control, and honestly, I respected him for it. It made me think he was a decent guy after all. When I got married at 22, all my guy friends started fading out of my life one by one, except for him. He kept showing up. Every time he was in town, he'd appear at my doorstep, and he called every year to wish me a happy birthday. It was odd, because even though he always said he was attracted to me, he stayed just a friend, even after I was married. When I got pregnant, he started visiting more often. He seemed genuinely thrilled about my pregnancy, which I thought was sweet at the time. The last time we saw each other, he was leaving, and as he looked out his car, he called to me, "Is it a boy or a girl?" When I told him it was a girl, he smiled, looking so pleased. I didn't think anything of it then. He just seemed like the same kind, supportive friend he'd always been. A few months after my daughter was born, my phone pinged with a reminder for his birthday. I called to wish him well, but he didn't pick up. I left a voicemail, figuring he was busy. Days passed, and he didn't call back, which was strange. He was always so consistent. I tried again, but still no answer. I started to worry. What if something had happened to him? On a whim, I decided to Google his name, thinking maybe he'd been in an accident or worse. What I found made my blood run cold. He was in prison. It turned out he'd raped a 5-year-old girl. It happened while the girl and her mother were in another room. The girl had screamed for her mom, but for some reason, her mother didn't come. The article said the girl's mother later shared that the child kept asking, "Mom, I called you. Why didn't you come?" That little girl even tried to take her own life afterward. I was shaking as I read it, and then it hit me. I realized why he'd been so happy when I got pregnant, why he'd started visiting more, why he'd smiled so brightly when I told him I was having a girl. The thought of what that sick bastard might have been planning still makes my skin crawl. He only got 6 years in prison, and now he's out. Earlier this year, he tried to reach me through Facebook, but I blocked him immediately. There's an article about the incident. It's in Hebrew, but you can translate it with Google if you want to see it for yourself. This happened in Australia about 12 years ago when I was 24. I'm 36 now, living about an hour or two north of Sydney. Back then, I worked afternoon and night shifts, which meant I had to take the train to and from the city. One particular night, I'd just gotten off at the station about 15 minutes from the unit block where I lived with my mom, my older brother, and my 2 younger sisters. Near the station, there's a small shopping center, a public school, and a daycare just north of it. I should mention this to give you a sense of the area, since it matters for the story. The main road runs past the shops, curves up around a fairly steep bend, then goes down the other side of the daycare and school, and finally past my unit block. So back to that night. It was the early hours of the morning, and I was walking home. As I passed the shopping center, I noticed a figure on the loading dock. It seemed odd since the shops were closed, and they didn't have any night staff. I kept going, starting the uphill climb toward home, but I got this sudden, overwhelming urge to look back. My stomach dropped when I did. There was this strange guy following me, moving in a really creepy way, like he was stalking me. He had his back pressed against the wall of the shopping center, sidestepping while staring right at me. I turned and started running up the incline. I'm not exactly the fittest guy, so it took everything out of me. When I reached the top, right in front of the daycare, I glanced back. There's a tall chain-link fence at the back of the daycare, so I figured I might be okay. I didn't see him, so I kept walking, heading past the daycare toward home. Then my senses went into overdrive. I heard someone running and scrambling, like they were climbing over that chain fence. I took off, sprinting down the road past the school, and finally reached the main driveway of my unit block, completely out of breath. I mustered the courage to look back up the street, and what I saw scared the hell out of me. That same figure was standing no more than 10 meters away, staring at me. This guy looked unhinged, tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches or 6 feet 3 inches, huffing and puffing from chasing me. He was dressed in black, with a grayish beard and hair. The memory of his eyes still gives me chills. There was so much hate and malice in them. I knew I'd be in serious trouble if he caught me. With that, I bolted again, tearing down a driveway. As I ran, I noticed him veering off toward a side path that runs alongside the school and our unit block. There's a gap in the fence along the block he could slip through, and it wasn't far from our unit. I pushed myself to the limit, racing to our door. I could see my mom awake in the kitchen through the window. She must have spotted me sprinting because she opened the door just as I reached it. I barreled inside, nearly knocking her over, and we slammed the door shut. Right then, I heard something crash outside, like a trash can being kicked over near the carport by our front door. I grabbed my baseball bat, ready to confront this creep, and ran back outside, adrenaline pumping. But he was gone. No sign of him. I told my mom everything that had happened, my heart still racing. I didn't call the police, though, and that decision haunts me. A week later, I heard about another guy who was attacked and stabbed while walking home in the early hours. The description said the attacker was wearing dark clothing, just like the guy who chased me. They never caught him. I still feel awful for not reporting it. If I had, maybe that other guy wouldn't have gotten hurt.